It was the in-between time of the trips of delivering the Army's supply system, and so I finally came down from the Hawaiian mountaintop to do some real work. And so I busied myself writing computer programs, surfing, taking a graduate course in some stuff that I already knew, selling seashells by the beach, and starting to seriously study the toe as well as her ankle and her knee. It was the early 70s, still of the counterculture era, and I was in my early 20s, although it is now the 00s as I write this, and I'm wondering what kind of name the future will use to refer to this 00 decade. During the coming tens, or the teens perhaps, yet another problem decade, they might say, back in the noughts, too old-fashioned. I mean back in the 00s, nope. It was the zeros, maybe. The theory of everything was finally solved in the ToeQuest forums. I've settled on the UOs as a name, since it is a time of unease. But I will have to get Prof. Pat to work on it. For meanwhile, in this story back then, he was starting on the road towards a grand professorship by taking Accounting 101, the abacus. I was as free as a quark in the Army's nucleus when I was drafted into it, which wasn't too bad, since the strong force weakens near the quarks and lets them roam a bit. But I was soon promoted and projected into an electron, as Prof. Pat's theory figures, and thus much freer to roam the world on the Army trips. Also, at about this time, Greybeard was heading for India, smartly taking his retirement early, before he had to work for the rest of his life, at a time when he was the most able. He now runs Australia's electrical system. Frederick and Nobody were on their way to a peace conference, but not their own, for their dispute was but a minor disagreement about whether nothing existed, but to resolve a battle between a country's north and south. Why does a country's east hardly ever go to war with its west? Well, the weeks went by, the seashells selling briskly, and the punched cards not having any hanging chad problems. And so I picked up the computer tapes to deliver to Vietnam, which was not my favorite destination. I decided to spice up the trip by taking a vacation from my life in Hawaii afterwards. Who would do that? But they gave me a month every year, by side-tripping to India, Pakistan, and Tibet, hoping to visit the mother of all mountaintops, the Himalayas. Around this time, Prof. Pat actually began his 30-year experiments towards the theory that 3 interwoven superstrings were the quarks of the proton that give rise to all the sights and sounds of the twilight zone in which we live.
Meanwhile, McKirkpatrick was beginning his search for the one of consciousness, having found that 2 is 1 too many and that 3 is a crowd. Michael is often born again, although his mothers never really enjoyed going through this, and he did once find the secret of the one in a past life, but forgot it upon rebirth, for he was always very young when he was born. Currently, his house in England is flooding and floating away. Lucky that he mostly lives on a floatable lounge chair, and so he may have to flee to Turkey's hot climate to avoid these serious effects of global warming. I bid adieu to the archipelago and friends, saying I'll be back, long before Arnold made it popular, and then flew into the setting sun, but knew I wouldn't get burned since it would soon be night. However, the sun, which plummets like a stone in the tropics, was soon brought back up again, rising in the west, of all places, from the plane's progress. I should have gotten off while the world had stopped, but I did throw my bottle of whiskey out the window. It turns out that, in the future, Nobody had just finished his investigation of the Guardian of Forever, a megalithic monument found in the Star Trek episode, City on the Edge of Forever. It was a device placed by who knows whom that revealed all of history at a glance of near-universal speed. Luckily, Mr. Spock had recorded some of it on a tricorder that was built of subconscious neurons that could slow down time from its all-at-once superposition of all the possible pasts and futures. Dr. McCoy had stepped into the past and had changed the future by not letting a pacifist leader, Joan Collins, die. And so, Hitler had time to complete his heavy water experiments and to develop the atom bomb, and eventually rule the world. Such are the whims of fate that our world is subject to, kind of like the butterfly effect. This encounter was to send Nobody on the most super toe quest that any of us have ever attempted, going where no man has gone before. No, not to the ladies' room. A quest that to me and others is really quite amazing to follow. While the Guardian was the answer to our own galactic history, it was not the ultimate answer, but its workings were a good start.
I landed in Japan and took a commuter plane to Osaka near an Air Force base. There was no first-class seat from here on out, just a kind of chair in a cargo jet, one that carried tanks in the rear. It was so noisy that I wouldn't have been able to hear my iPod if it had been invented then. Longbin's airstrip was crowded, and so I maneuvered between many whirling tail rotors to a helicopter leaving for the nearby base. That night, some rockets landed at the other end of the base, and so someone fearlessly nicknamed Rascal Puff, an actual combat soldier, was sent out to quell the attack. He was rather impervious to injury, since he mostly resided in the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimensions, places that bullets usually missed by a mile or infinity. I remembered seeing posters back in New York saying that gravity is the 4th dimension, and so now I know it had to be him. Having made my first delivery of tapes that morning, a warrant officer then flew me 100 miles or more over the jungle to a remote base, noting that a previous courier's helicopter had been shot down. "I know," I replied. "That was one of my predecessors. I fly all the routes now." Even before that incident, the civil service workers hadn't really wanted this delivery job, for they had families or had gotten tired of it, and of course after the incident, didn't want any part of it whatsoever, but I saw it as adventure, and I still do. In Saigon's airport, I ran into who I now realize must have been Frederick being whisked away to the peace conference in a limo. I booked a flight to India for the next day and watched the conference on TV at my hotel. Frederick was showing a map of North and South Vietnam and was making great headway with the delegates. But he had to be honest and tell them that the North and South were forever oppositional, and that the twain could meet only as East meets West in transition. Hopes dimmed, but then nobody appeared out of thin air, having ridden waves of time displacement from the Guardian that were dilated by the delay of all the superpositions, and told the Vietnamese of both sides how they, as North and South, could get very close, infinitely close, and that they were much alike as well by meeting at the equator. But alas, their animosities were too deep, and the peace table collapsed as all the mad dogs went off howling into the night. Now in India, I came across Greg Isaac Newton, who I now see was really greybeard, one who lived by his wits there. He was talking to the monkey man about anything and everything the theory of. Lloyd was ever busy helping the Irish fight the British, while R.P. Bibra, living back in his wild days, was shooting at Lloyd. I rode on the roof of a train towards Pakistan and later observed Greybeard buying some liquids at the duty-free shop while I waited to fly toward the mountains of Tibet. I climbed the Himalayas and complained to the wise Lama up there that life could be hell. He said, "Get lost, go make a heaven of hell, and then me tell. The door is never shut on the prison cell, so why would you ever want to stay inside it when the door is always so wide open?" He also gave me a piece of paper that had "All is three" written on it, which I couldn't figure out. He wouldn't tell me. I just came across the other day, realizing that it meant matter in motion through space.